We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished.
እውነት ከመሬት በታች ተቀብሮ በሚገኝበት ምድር ሐሰትና መጻ የዕለት ጉርስ በሆኑበት ወቅት እውነታን ፈልፍሎ ማግኘት ከውጊያ አይተናነስም። እኔም ይህን በተረዳሁበት ወቅት ነበር እውነታ ወደ ተቀበረችበት ምድር ለመጓዝ ትጥቄን ያጠለቅኩት። ጉዞው ቀላል እንደማይሆን እያወቅኩ ስለገባው በመንገዴ እንደማልታከት እምነት ነበረኝ። በዚህ ጊዜ ነበር ታዲያ ታዋቂውን የስሪላንካ ሀገር ተወላጅ የሆነውን የምጣኔ ሀብት ባለሙያ ሆዋርድ ኒኮላስን ያወቅኩት። ይህ የምጣኔ ሀብት ባለሙያ የሚታወቀው ታዲያ ስጋን አልፈው ወደ አጥንት በሚዘልቁ የኢኮኖሚ ጥናትና ምርምሮቹ ነው። የዚህን ምሁር ሙሉ ትኩረት የሳበው ነገር ደግሞ why Africa remains poor አፍሪካ ለምን ደሃ ሆና ቀረች የሚለው ነበር። ረዘም ላለ ጊዜ በተመስጦ ሁኔታውን ካጤነ በኋላ የምዕራባውያኑን አንደበት የሚዘጋ ውጤት ይዞ ብቅ አለ። ነገሩን ግልጽ ለማድረግ በሸረሪት ድር የተከበበውን የቆየ የኢኮኖሚ መጽሐፍ አነሳው። እንዲህ ይላል። በ1945 ዓመተ ምህረት 44 የዓለም ሀገራት መሪዎች በአሜሪካ ስብሰባ ሲቀመጡ አዲስ የንግድ ስርዓት ሊዘረጉ ነበር። ከዚህ በፊት የነበረው የንግድ ስርዓት ዘ ጎልደን ስታንዳርድ በመባል ይታወቃል። ወርቅን መተማመኛ ያደረገ የንግድ ስርዓት እንደማለት ነው። በዚህ ስርዓት ሀገሮች ለሚያትሙት የገንዘብ መጠን እኩያ መተማመኛ የሚሆን ወርቅ በማዕከላዊ ባንኮቻቸው ያስቀምጣሉ። የፈለገም ገንዘቡን ከባንክ ወስዶ ሲያበቃ ወደ ወርቅ መቀየር ይቻላል። ሁለተኛው የዓለም ጦርነት በርካታ የአውሮፓ ሀገሮችን አውድሟል። በርካታ ሀገራትም የመተማመኛ ወርቃቸውን ወደ አሜሪካ ልከዋል። ጦርነቱ ሊጠናቀቅ ወራት ብቻ ሲቀሩ በአሜሪካ የተሰበሰቡት የሀገሪቷ መሪዎች ከሁሉ በላይ ይህን ሀቅ ልብ ብለውታል። ከጦርነቱ ማግስት ከሁሉ ፈርጥሞ የሚወጣው የአሜሪካ የመገበያያ ዶላር በምድራችን ሁሉ መገበያያ እንዲሆን ሲስማሙ በዚያው ዕለት አንስተው ነበር አምናዋት አላትና አታጭበረብርም ብለው ያሰቡት። ጦርነቱን በተከተሉት አስርታት ዓመታት የአሜሪካ ኢኮኖሚ አደገ፣ ተመነደገ። ዶላርም የምድራችን ዲፋክቶ ኖላዊ መገበያያ ሆኖ ዘለቀ። አውሮፓውያን አፍሪካን በቅኝ ግዛት በያዙበት ወቅት አፍሪካውያን ከምዕራባውያን ጋር የባሪያ ንግድን በመነገድ በመተኮም ምግቦችን ይቀበሉ ነበር። ይህ ሁሉ ሲሆን ታዲያ ምዕራባውያኑ ከአፍሪካ የከበሩ ማዕድናትን መቦጥቦጥ አላቆሙም ነበር። መቀበልን እንጂ ማምረትን ያለመደው የአፍሪካውያኑ እጅ በነጮቹ ትከሻ ላይ ጉብ ማለቱን የጀመረው በቅኝ ግዛቱ ሳቢያ ነበር። ወደ ሆዋርድ ኒኮላስ ስንመለስ ምዕራባውያኑ ምን ያህል ቁማር በአፍሪካኖች ላይ እንደተጫወቱ የተገለጸለት ከብዙ ውጣ ውረድ በኋላ ነበር። መጀመሪያ አፍሪካውያን የባሪያነት ስሜት እንዲጫናቸው በቅኝ ግዛት ተገዙ። አስከትሎም ያላቸውን ሀብትና ንብረት እንዳይገነዘቡ መርዛማ በሆኑ ቲዎሪዎች አእምሯቸውን በከሉት። እያለም ለግብይት ዶላርን እንዲጠቀሙ ተጫኗቸው። አፍሪካ ደሃ ሆና እንድትቀር ያደረጋትን ትልልቅ አጀንዳዎች ከማንሳቴ በፊት አንድ ነገር ሹክ ልበላችሁ። ዛሬ ላይ ወደ ከፍተኛ ትምህርት ተቀላቅለው ሰርቲፊኬቶችንና ሽልማቶችን ተንቆጥቁጠው የሚመረቁ የኢኮኖሚክስ ደቀ መዛሙርት እንደ ጮማ የፋፋው የነጮቹን አቅሊዮን የሳተ ቲዎሪ ሸምድደው በየማህበራዊ ሚዲያው ላይ በሱፍ አጊጠው ሲወጡ ሰው ቢመስሉም ሰው አለመሆናቸውን የምትረዱት ግን ንግግራቸውን በጥልቀት ስታጤኑ ነው። አለ የተባለ ኢኮኖሚስት ቃለ መጠይቅ ላይ እንዲህ ብሎ ነበር። ኢትዮጵያ እኮ ወደ ኋላ የቀረችው ሊበራላይዝ ማድረግ ስላልቻለች ነው። መንግስት በገበያው ስርዓት ላይ ጣልቃ በመግባት እንቅፋት መሆን የለበትም። ይህን ንግግር ከርሱ ብቻ በሰማው ምናልባትም ከግንዛቤ እጥረት ይሆናል በሚል አልፈው ነበር። ሆኖም ግን የአብዛኛው ምሁር ተብዬዎች የጋራ አመለካከት መሆኑን ስረዳ ምናልባትም በዚህ ነገር ደም ግፊቴ አቅሌውን ሳይስት ነፍሳቸውን ይማርና መለስ ዜናዊ ከሀገራችንም አልፎ የአፍሪካ ኢኮኖሚ ምን መምሰል እንዳለበት የተረዱ ድንቅ መሪ የኢኮኖሚ ገለጻ ሳዳምጥ ቱግ ብሎ የነበረው ሰውነቴ ወደ ነበረበት ሲመለስ ይታወቀኛል። ዘመን አፈራሽ ስለሆኑት የአሁኖቹ የሀገራችን ኢኮኖሚስቶችና ስለ ኢትዮጵያ የኢኮኖሚ ሂደት ለማማከር ከአሜሪካ ድረስ በረው ስለሚመጡት ሰዎች ጉድ ትዝብቱን ለእናንተው ትቼ ቅድም ጎንተል አድርጌያት ወደ ነበረችው ሐሳብ ልመልሳችሁ።
The point is that we have actually got student populations now who are not thinking about what they're studying. They're not relating it to the real world. So as a consequence, the economics that we have today is totally divorced from the real world, and the students even implicitly know this. So they learn one thing, they know it has no relationship to reality, but they have to do it because they have to pass exams. Period.
አፍሪካ ድሃ ሆና እንድትቀጥል የሚያደርጋትን ስድስቱን ነጥቦች እንመልከት። አንደኛ፣ ፎሪን ኤድ የውጭ ሀገር እርዳታ።
Okay, we give them aid. Aid for what? Actually, we give them aid to keep repressive regimes in power. That's all. Okay, we're not giving them aid for much more except a little bit of infrastructure to make sure those raw materials get to the ports and aren't gotten out of the ground. But for the most part, we give repressive regimes money and power and guns to keep that system going. This is what it's fundamentally about. All the hypocrisy about transparency and democracy and bullshit like that, it's all bullshit. You know? And at least the Chinese don't enter into that bullshit. They say, we don't care about the whole political environment, we just give the money. Okay? And it's for raw material extraction. Period.
ሁለተኛ debts and foreign loans የውጭ ሀገር ያልተከፈለ ዕዳ።
Some of my students today, is it today or yesterday, about confessions of an economic hitman. You remember this? Have any of you heard of this one? Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's a book written by John Perkins, who used to work for a very nebulous, opaque bank. No one had ever heard of this bank, but it was formed in the 1950s by the IMF, the CIA, and the American State Department. And it had only one job, to lend money to developing countries that were raw material producers in order to indebt them. Once you are in my debt, I control you. Okay? And this bank had 4,000 employees, but no one ever heard of this bank, you see. But it would go to country after country offering loans. And if the president did not accept the loan, they were killed. And he gives two examples of presidents who were killed when they did not accept the loan. You see, the lending is also very important to trap the country. It's very important. It's part of that process. I teach in Suriname. And Suriname in recent times had a huge foreign exchange reserve. So big they didn't need to borrow money. And then one of my students who was very high up in government, he said, you know, the IMF is trying to convince us to borrow money from foreigners. Why? I thought, duh, you know, sorry about this, but, you know, this is the game. And in the end, Suriname did borrow this money because the IMF said, if foreigners lend to you, then everyone will think Suriname is such a strong economy that foreigners are interested in lending to you. You understand? Before Lula came to power, you know, the previous president in Brazil, Cardoso, his predecessor, took a gigantic international loan. No necessity for taking the loan. Why? Because once I catch you with the debt strings, I hold you forever. You are my prisoner. Okay, so debt has been this huge spider's web which has trapped sub-Saharan Africa and keeps them held there. Aid, debt.
ሶስተኛ ሞኖፖሊ ባይንግ ስትራክቸርስ ከታዳጊ ሀገራት የሚሸምቱት ሀያላን ሀገራት ጥቂቶች በመሆናቸውና ዋጋውን መቆጣጠር በመቻላቸው የተከሰተ
all raw materials and basic agricultural goods produced by developing countries there are only 4 or 5 Western multinationals that buy all those goods. And they collude between them. So if you take any major product, these Western multinationals, they collude between them. Even if we go down to banana production, we had a PhD done here at the ISS, and the person showed that the 4 or 5 major multinationals, they collude, and in order to make sure their control is total, what they do is they force all the producers to produce the same uniform banana. You know, the crap you buy in the West and has no taste at all. You go to any developing country, you know how a banana tastes, don't you? There's so many of them, lots of varieties, but we only market 1 or 2 types, so we have control, you see. If you don't produce at the price I want you to produce, I go to the next country. You see, we get control. So these buyers, they impose that control, and they keep pushing the prices down and down and down. Okay, this is the game. No one says anything about it. There are no commissions of inquiry to say this is illegal what you're doing. The WTO has nothing to say about this. But sorry to say, you know, if banana prices rose 10 times, especially for people like me who love bananas, okay, I protest. I like my living standards. Okay? It's the same with all the other raw materials, you see. We're all benefiting, we're complicit. We're actually complicit in this because we will protest and shout out if the situation ever changed.
አራተኛ ኢንተርናሽናል ኢኮኖሚክ ኢንስቲትዩሽንስ ዓለም አቀፍ የኢኮኖሚ ድርጅቶች
World Bank, WTO. We always think evil creatures, horrible. It's not. It's just economics. It's economic warfare. The rich declare war on the poor. It happens everywhere. It happens in a country. The rich control the government. Of course they do. You really believe you have democracy? Come on. You know, I mean, grow up. This is not about people living in democratic systems. What we have is the rich control. The rich set up these institutions explicitly to control the poor countries. And they don't give them much room for maneuver. Which incidentally, when the IMF starts talking of poverty alleviation, you should also understand that there's another game there also starting to play, which I'm going to come back to later. But what do these institutions do? What does the IMF do? What is structural adjustment about? It's about making sure countries keep producing what we want them to produce. We make sure they have recurrent balance of payments problems. You notice these countries never get out of balance of payments problems. You notice that? Whereas countries that never took IMF support are always out of balance of payments problems. But the countries that are continuously getting advice and support by the IMF, they're always in balance of payments problems. Why? Because that's the way we keep our stranglehold on them.
አምስተኛ ዲስትራክሽን ኦፍ ሰልፍ ፉድ ሰፊሽንሲ ራሳችንን ችለን ህዝባችንን ሊመግብ የሚችል የምግብ እህል ማምረት አለመቻላችን
Colonization started it. Okay? One of the most important things is we destroy food self-sufficiency. Okay? And the World Bank continued it. They forced most countries to eliminate all food subsidies and food support. Okay? Because once you don't produce your own food, I increase my control of you. How do we know this? Well, very funny thing happened some years ago. Not so funny, actually. It involved starvation of a large number of people in Malawi. Okay? Many of you could remember this because it was really tragic. But the Malawian finance minister, who was under terrible threat at the time, suddenly broke ranks and he said, well, you know why we had this famine? Because one of the conditions of the loan given by the World Bank was we destroyed all our grain surplus stocks. Why? Because remember, we want you dependent. 1970s, the US Senate, the US Congress said, we will not allow Latin America to produce their own food. We will start a strategy involving the IMF and the World Bank to destroy food self-sufficiency of Latin America. Then they will indeed be our true backyard. And that's exactly what they've done. Look at all the Latin American countries. Look at them. They used to be food self-sufficient, but they're no longer food self-sufficient. Now here comes the kicker. This is the beautiful part of it. I congratulate them. You know I admire them because they do it so well. Okay? I know it sounds really perverse, but we have now in the WTO something called the Agreement on Agriculture. Okay? You know what that Agreement on Agriculture states? It says, if you don't have any subsidies, you're not allowed to put these subsidies on food. But if you have subsidies and income support for food production, you can keep them. Who has all the subsidies and income support? US, Europe. The largest budgets in the world for supporting their farmers are Europe and US. But the World Bank and IMF have destroyed all those subsidies. You see, all those subsidies have been destroyed. And now we're telling these countries, you don't have subsidies? Tough luck. You know? You see, we're keeping them dependent. We're keeping them on a string.
ስድስተኛ ፑር ስኩል ካሪኩለም ደካማ የትምህርት ስርዓት መኖር ማለትም የነጮቹን ሐሳብ ብቻ እውነት አድርጎ በመቀበል ለሀገሬ ይሆናል ወይስ አይሆንም የሚለውን ሳያጠና ወደ ስራ ሲገባ
You see, we teach in many cases garbage. And it doesn't hurt anyone, a lot of this garbage. You know, it's just blah, 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 blah. And we don't know what we have learned, but anyway, we were there at the university and you got a certificate and you go away and you feel you've learned something. But sometimes we teach very destructive things. And no more important than when we're teaching people from developing countries. Okay, and one of those very damaging and destructive things is the doctrine of comparative advantage. It's a lie from beginning to end. It's utter crap. It has been decimated many times, but we keep it in every curriculum. Why? Because it tells sub-Saharan African countries that their destiny is to produce raw materials, you see. And if you produce raw materials, you get rich just like we are in the West. You see, this is the game we're playing, and just for you to be totally confused, we normally build models with it, mathematical models, so you really have no idea what we're talking about, but it seems all very scientific. Then we have the modern version of this is because it's all a failure, we know it's a failure, we now have a new generation of economists saying, it's only a failure because you're all corrupt in your countries. We call that new institutional economics. You've all probably learnt it all, but you didn't know why they invented it. It was invented to tell you the same thing. You should keep producing raw materials. Now, don't be as corrupt as you were before. Nobody ever told you that aid was designed to actually start the corruption process in the first place. Okay, and we need corruption to make sure you're doing all these things. But now we blame the victim. You're poor because it's your fault, basically. And you're poor, stupid, and corrupt, basically. This is the message that we're giving people. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight.
መርሃ ግብሩ እስካሁን የተከታተላችሁትን ይመስል ነበር። ብዙ ቁም ነገርም እንዳገኛችሁበት አልጠራጠርም። ስለሆነም የክሌስን የዩቲዩብ ቻናል ሰብስክራይብ ማድረጋችሁን አትርሱ። እግዚአብሔር ከተሰወረው የነጮቹ መርዘማ ወጥመድ አውጥቶ ታላቋን ኢትዮጵያ ዳግመኛ እንዲያሳየን ፈቃዱ ይሁን እላለሁ። ደህና ቆዩ።